All right, welcome back to another hour of Scotch Hour. This is basically a retake. Jesse, in this episode here, we're going to talk about The Matrix. We have our restaurant review. We did it in honor of The Matrix. And then also we have our Scotch.
Scotch Reviewed.
So, what's the name of the Scotch here?
This is the Tamdhu 12.
Tamdhu 12.
Space side, single malt Scotch, 43% alcohol by volume.
And you can see, you can see the package. It's out of the package already.
Very handsome package.
We didn't hit the record button, or I didn't hit the record button to begin with, but it's an awesome package, really.
It is.
And I think a little bit about the history of the Tamdhu is that in 1898, there was a bunch of entrepreneurs that got involved. They wanted to create the best Scotch that they could make. 1898, that was in 1897. So in 1898, that's when they started looking at using sherry casks from Spain, and they got the spot there on the River Spey. 49, that's when they modernized the distillery. 1970, they added 4 new stills to it. 2010, something happened. They closed up shop. And then 2012, Ian McLeod opened the distillery.
Ian McLeod of the Clan Cloud?
There can only be one. All right.
Highlander, such a great movie.
It is a great movie. All right. So what was your take on this?
Oh, for the color, it is a very nice medium to light gold, more of that gold, a little bit of the brass, but not so much for me with the nose. Initially orange and oak. Those are the two big things with just a hint of cinnamon and a little bit of orange right at the front. You get a well-blended body of oak, and I think that's partially, as we had talked about, it is matured in new Oloroso sherry casks for part of the Scotch, and some of it is also reused Oloroso casks, and part of that I think gives it this wonderful oak flavor from nose until the finish, and then the finish for me is it's a nice medium finish, and I mean that exactly like that. It's not a super long finish. It's not a quick finish. It's not hot or cold, but it comes in. You get a little bit of that cinnamon and the oak for me. I love oak, that sherry oak in particular. It just is from the beginning to the end, and it kind of wraps up again with a little bit of that spice. And one of the things you had noted that I didn't originally notice off the nose, but after you mentioned it, I agree with you 100%, was the missing link when I was trying to figure out what that smell was, and that's that mint chocolate.
Yeah, so when I first looked at it, which it's almost kind of gone at this point. But I did get the golden amber, not quite as brassy as the Macallan Edition 6. It is a little bit darker in the golden amber color than maybe some of the other ones we've looked at here on Scotch Art previously. On the nose, I do get the kind of like a wet oak with the mint chocolate and cinnamon. And then when I go to the palate, my beginning of the palate, I get some, as you mentioned, I think before, it was the dried fruits. So I'm getting basically in the front part of my palate, I'm getting like a little bit of plum, slight banana, and then then when it gets like my mid palate, it gets kind of jammy for me. And then at the beginning of the finish, that jammy kind of turns into kind of like a fudge. But it really finishes off with cinnamon and oak. And I can almost say that cinnamon oak finish, it could be maybe a slight peat, but it's really hard for me to pick up on the peat. But as I let it sit open for a little bit longer, I think I got a slight bit more of a peat than before. But really, it's just cinnamon and oak, or one could even say cinnamon and smoke. But I'm going to lean more towards the oak now. And that's pretty much my review of this one. I do like it. I think it's a great bottle. I think the price point wasn't too bad. I think it was $60 over there at Total Wine and More. So if you're looking for a decent bottle, $60 range, I think this has some pretty good flavors.
It is definitely different. I don't know that it would be my first choice, but far from my last.
Yeah, it's. I think it's if you want something different than your normal Scotch, like because it definitely stands out quite a bit different than the Macallan, the Oban, the Lagavulins, and then the Glenmorangies. I think it's kind of a character of its own.
It is, and actually, you mentioning that makes me think about how great it might go with like a cinnamon coffee cake.
It's time for our shout-outs.
Oh, shout outs. Two very quick ones. One to my kiddos, Mila and Aiden, both going after things to find their happiness, which you guys will see later is one of the notes for our Smarter Challenge. So, taking steps necessary, giving it their all, not giving up, finding some happiness, keep it real, keep it happy, you guys. The second one to Verstappen and the Formula One season, honestly, to everyone right now, Honda, but first Verstappen in particular, having to have a very mature race after doing great in qualifying, little hiccup, did some damage to his car, probably would have been on pole, and didn't quite get that little start he wanted for the race, but absolutely finished strong in second. Looking forward to the final race of the season.
All right. Mine was to a waitress over at a restaurant that we had previously visited, which is Little Ricci's. I just know she is a young redhead. I didn't get her name, but at first I sat there for about 8 minutes before anyone came by to help me. She came by, asked if I had anyone had served me, and I said no. I made my order. She actually screwed up my drink order at first. She corrected that, and then she screwed up my meal order. Corrected that, but when she corrected those, she took them off my bill. So I think she made everything good. So I just want to give compliments to her and then also to Little Ricci's. Once again, coming through at the end, even though it was a little bit bumpy ride through it. So that's my shout out.
Restaurant Review.
So in The Matrix, they talk about everything tasting like chicken. So we did venture over to the Chicken Shack here at the Corner Star location, basically Parker and Arapahoe Road. And we almost had the same dinner, we pretty much had the same dinner. So for me, it's the 3 chicken finger bowl, if you will, busket. So they lay down a bed of fries. They put on 3 sliced and chopped chicken fingers and then smother it with some green chili. And then per the hostess's or server's recommendation, we had some bacon on top of this. And I was like, man, that sounds good. She recommended it to Noah. I followed suit, jumped on board, and it was pretty delicious. The one thing that was different for me of all of these, 30 years of my life on this planet, I've never had a fried Twinkie. So I had a deep fried Twinkie, and it was all right. It was good. I kept thinking about Zombieland. Yeah. Zombieland and his hunt for this Twinkie. Man, he would have been pissed that thing being deep fried. But he goes and he finds his Twinkie eventually at the end of the show. But yeah, that's all I could think about was Zombieland. Like, where's the zombies for this? Dinner was great. The environment for a fast food styled restaurant, going to be a 6 for me. The service, however, the servers were amazing. And, again, this is fast food. So they basically take your order at the counter. We sat down, dined in. They brought it to us. They did hold off on making my deep fried Twinkie and until the end when we were ready. It was good. I don't know if I would ever do it again, but it was a great experience to have one. Zombieland, I'll take the fresh Twinkie over the deep fried one in the future. But yeah, the service was easily, I'm actually going going to give service a 9, and that is because they did just a great job. These people looked happy to be there, and I hope that the owners or managers know what kind of great service they're giving because of that. I'm assuming they do, because usually you don't get employees that happy unless they're being taken care of. So if that's the case, good job to you guys, owners and managers, for taking care of those employees. Is this a date-worthy place? If you're a high school kid and you're taking a first date there, yeah, maybe. If you're 30 years oldish like we are you taking a first date there? Probably not. We're going to recommend many of the other restaurants we visited, maybe Ted's Montana Grill if you want some steak, or oh man, how about a Brazilian steakhouse? Can't go wrong. Again, steak, man. I guess I'm a meat eater. But, for that, it's not going to knock somebody's socks off, but it's fun. It's simple, especially if you're young. It's good food. Great place to go with a friend. Value, I'm going to give it right around a 7. The meal itself was great. Not complaining. You can't get much better for $10. And, overall for me, it was an 8.
Okay, so yes, we did have the same meal. It's called the Rocky Mountain Fries, I think. And it's pretty good. It's covered in green chili and cheese. Like you mentioned, the waitress or the lady at the counter, she recommended putting bacon on it. And who doesn't love bacon? So I said, sure to the bacon. And she was right. It was awesome. I've been there a few times before. Usually I get what's called the buff fries, and that's where it's basically the same thing, but instead of the green chili, what they will put in is one of the different sauces for the chicken, whether it be, and usually I get mine with the medium flavored buffalo style sauce, and so basically it comes with cheese, the buffalo sauce, and ranch, and I think that's just as good. Sometimes I also get a barbecue sauce. And the large size is pretty large. And the thing is, between the large and the small, it's $1 difference. And so I'm always a sucker going for the large, and I can never finish it. And really, if you really wanted to, you can actually split a large between 2 people. It's really enough food to split between 2 people, to be honest. And so usually half the time I have to dump out like half my fries anyways. Any case, to your point, I would give it somewhere between a 7.5 and an 8. The service there, as you mentioned, the work staff there, they were you could tell they were genuinely happy to be there. I'm not sure if it was like the crew that was working that night all got along really well or whatever, but they were dancing. You could tell, even though they were wearing masks, you could tell that they were smiling and giggling. But even though they were having a good time dancing and doing all of this types of stuff, they were totally on ball with getting the food out. So no one was really waiting for their food. They didn't ignore any of the customers that came into the place. So, hats off to the management and the owners of that store. So if anyone ever watches it, please, I think you should give those your workers a raise or something, because they did an awesome job. And I do agree with Jesse. I think hopefully that management there appreciates how good of a job that their workers were doing that night, which was tonight. First state worthy. I think if you're maybe college or high school, sure, you could probably take a first date there. If you're probably in your mid-20s and older, it may not be a first date type of place, but it might be a place you might take after you guys are in a established relationship, to where you guys are you're not trying to impress her anymore, you're not trying to impress him anymore, but you guys want to go grab a decent fast food dish. Then you could do that. If you just had grab something quick and then go ahead to the movies. Yeah, sure, why not? They have decent food. And but like I said, it's not really unless you're kind of an established couple, I wouldn't really say it's really a day place if you're over in your mid-20s or older. I will say, though, it is kind of a decent place. Maybe just go chill and grab a bite to eat with a buddy, though. Yeah,
and they had a small beer selection. We had the Scottish Ale, which was great.
Yeah, the Scottish Ale was great, too, yeah. So overall, like I said, 7.5 to an 8. And if you do happen to go there, they have 2 locations. The one which is in Corner Store, right, which is Arapahoe and Parker Road. And then there's the other one that's in Parker off of 20 Mile. And I'm not even sure what the other crossroad is there, but it's right there by Target there on 20 Mile in Parker. So in any case, if you go there to either one of those two locations, let them know you heard about them on Scotch Hour.
Smarter challenges.
You know what? Let me say a few things, then we can go and bounce back and forth, dance as some might put it. So a couple quick things about The Matrix. The original Matrix, 1999, aired, or in theaters was released March 31st, 1999. So we're talking about a pretty good timeline. We're talking 22 years ago now. The second Matrix, The Matrix Reloaded, was 4 years and a month and a half later. It was May 16th, 2003. This was largely intentional because they wanted to release the second and third more close. And if you are an ultimate Matrix fan that loves all the movies, you know, disregard what I'm about to say, but the second movie was not up to par compared to the first or the third. The third did or was released just half a year, not even later, on October 27th, that same year as The Matrix Reloaded, Matrix Revolutions, October 27th, 2003, to kind of wrap it up. And if you haven't seen these movies in the last 22 to 19 years, a few spoiler alerts, as Noah already has mentioned earlier in the show, and we'll continue to mention. Pause this now, go watch the movies, or you may have a few things ruined if you haven't seen them yet. For me, the movies are not as impactful as they are for everyone. And there are, I think, are a lot of different reasons for that. One of which being, I am on a fine line of where I feel about science versus religion. And I think the movie dances its own ways, the movies, all three of them, and the fourth one coming out this month, they dance with this religious flavor, this little hint, a little nose of religion back and forth. And so for me, it's almost like they're dancing between science and science fiction at times. But at the same time, there are things that are absolutely true to me as well. A couple other things, when I think about what these movies are to me, they are, summed up, oversimplifying it, a social commentary on reality. So a social commentary on reality. They are humans or humanity's last stand against machines. And one of the things that's really interesting to me too is when I was going around and I was talking to some of the people I work with and some of the people I know, and I was asking them, hey, what do you guys think of The Matrix? One of the reactions I had more than not was, okay, if I ask you about The Matrix right here, right now, what was the emotional impact it had on you through the different movies? And what I would say is low achievers were typically less impacted by some of the theories they saw in the movies than high achievers. And I'm curious to continue having these conversations with them, is partially because, is that because as a low achiever, you're not afraid of being bested by a machine? Whereas the high achievers were absolutely emotionally drawn and drained from this thought of having to compete with a machine, of being bested by something that was not a living organism, so to speak, but an actual machine. So it was kind of interesting to me because for myself, I feel I am a very high achiever in many ways. However, I was not emotionally drained like most of the high achievers that I know.
Okay. That's an interesting take.
Just a couple of the key points I wanted to put out there, and I know you're going to take a very much more in-depth stance in many ways.
So yeah, with my research, and I was impacted by the movie. I thought as the cinematography, I think it kind of changed movies around that time, especially with how they did the fight scenes and the slow motion, like where he dodges the bullets, and the way they tied in not only philosophical but also religion and aspects of humans versus machines. There's like a whole lot of things that they wrapped up into these 3 movies that I think if you really take it, if you take the time to dive into it, you're going to see a whole lot of thought went into these. Like every character's name has a purpose, or I'm not even sure if you want to say it's a purpose, but it was intentionally done. And then when you look at some of the philosophical, like one of the easiest things, I guess, religious wise, you could see is possibly Christianity, but then there's also Buddhism that's tied into it, and there's also with Judaism that's tied into it. You see philosophies from Socrates, Plato. You'll see the skepticism part of philosophy. When you're talking about Descartes, is that his name? Yeah, Descartes. Yeah, Descartes. Rene Descartes, or how do you pronounce it? It's French. I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's a whole lot of and that's just like scratching the surface of it, and it goes in a little bit deeper, and when you start really starting to peel away the layers. And as I was mentioning to you earlier tonight, when I first threw out this Smarter Challenge, I wasn't really thinking I was gonna do a total deep dive. And as I started exploring more and more, I'm like, I just ran out of time, and I really wanted to actually do more research to present my side of it. But do you want me to go further into the philosophical stuff here?
Whichever angle you want to start with.
Okay, so all right, I'll start with this. A big question, or even a great quote from the movie The Matrix is, "Ignorance is bliss." But the question is ignorance really bliss, or is the truth really worth knowing? Because if you look at Cypher, the one character, he's saying because he took the red pill, but he regrets taking the red pill. And so to him, he thinks ignorance is bliss, and he would rather be ignorant of what the truth is. Whereas Neo, he was hesitant at first to take the red pill, but he preferred to know the truth, and it was worth everything that it cost him in order to know the truth and to, I guess, kind of go on his journey. And to him, ignorance wasn't the better out. So I think when we look at life in general, is it better to have ignorance, or is it better to seek the truth? And if we do seek the truth, is knowing the truth worth the cost? And I think it's an interesting question to kind of start diving into the Matrix.
It is a very interesting question. And with some of these, whether they be philosophical or religious angles, one of the things to think about the philosophical angle here is that ignorance can be bliss, and we see that largely with people who can't or don't want to, but can't handle the truth. Not knowing when you die, for example, does that give you a better life, or does it give you a happier life, or not? The opposite could be said, and that is, if you know exactly when you're going to die, you can engineer a happier life with what time you know you have left. So it's a really good question, and one that really poises to the more you know, the more you better be able to handle. And that is just the simple truth. Can you live with the fact of knowing when you're going to die? Because there are those who could handle it and would engineer. And I use that term exactly like that. If you know you have 30 years left to live, 30 productive years left to live, you can absolutely engineer your life for 30 years to know, knowing when you're going to end, how you want to live. So that could be you give 10 years to the hardest work ever because, you still got 20 great years after that. And then you take the next 10 years off. So as opposed to maybe working one job for 20 years, you work two jobs for 10 years and then have 10 years of potential bliss. And not everyone could do that. There are a lot of people, and many that I know, that knowing when they would die would literally just ruin them. They'd just become non-productive.
Let me ask you this. But do you think sometimes ignorance will lead someone to the slaughterhouse without them knowing about it? Because I think sometimes ignorance would do that.
It's a double-edged sword of a question, because if they know their end already and fate is a thing, then it doesn't matter.
Okay. So I think one of the key things that you kind of talked about there, which will bring in Socrates here, is you talked about happiness.
Yes.
Right? So when we look at like the mission, right? Neo's mission was to save the human race from being being slaves to artificial intelligence, right? Well, when we started looking at Socrates, because this movie or this trilogy also relates a lot with Socrates. And after Socrates goes and visits the Oracle, one of his main missions was to seek out what makes a good life, what makes you happy.
Right.
And so one of the questions that he posed to one of his friends is, what is holy? And his friend says, holiness is what the gods love, and it's opposite of what they hate, which is unholy. So then Socrates follows that up with his, is it holy because the gods approve of it, or do they approve of it because it is holy? And then his friend couldn't answer that. So this basically started like Socrates when he went to go visit the Oracle. The Oracle kind of pointed down the pathway for Socrates to go down, because the Oracle said that he was the wisest person in Athens, I think. And so he's like, well, how could I be the wisest person? Because I know I'm not the wisest person. So he goes around asking other people, and he finds out that by him knowing that he's not wise makes him the wisest person, essentially. So really, where I'm tying this back into with the mission with Neo, Trinity asks Neo, it's the question that drives us. And so Neo, if you watch the movies, he mentions a couple of things. She's basically, no, that's not it. And he goes, what is the Matrix? And she's like, that's the question. Right? So that's the question that drives us. So when we're looking at the Matrix, I think there's some things here that I'm starting to unpack here, because this goes a little bit deeper than just like what the mission is, what the Oracle is. Like, obviously, we started looking at some parallels between Socrates and Neo. Neo ends up going to see an Oracle, right? And when we look at the Greeks, Zeus sends off two eagles in two different directions. One goes east, one goes west. They meet up in the middle in Delphi, or Delphi, or whatever. And that's where the Oracle is, and that's where he goes and sees the Oracle. And now the Oracle, they're able to smell some kind of like fumes or whatever coming from the ground, which is supposed to be from Apollo. And if you go watch the movie The Matrix, when he goes and sees the Oracle smells the cookies, so there's like a relationship there. And one of the big things here when we're looking at the Oracle is that in ancient times during Greece, and when Socrates was there, one of the things it talks about is that you must know thyself. And if you watch the movie in the kitchen, I believe right above the door frame, that's where it says know thyself. And not only do you have to know yourself, but nothing in excess. So when he goes to leave, the Oracle tells Neo to take one cookie. Not as many as he wants or anything like that, so he doesn't overindulge. So he keeps everything in, keeps nothing in excess, which becomes really important when you start to look at Agent Smith versus Neo. Neo knows himself, and after he dives into Agent Smith, a part of Neo becomes part of Agent Smith. And Agent Smith, when that happens, does not know himself, and he starts going to live in excess. And he doesn't know how to stop, and that causes the destruction of the Matrix, if you will. What's your thought about this?
A very interesting quote. This is a Mark Twain quote, is sanity and happiness are an impossible combination. And I think this is a great quote. Mark Twain, witty, curmudgeon, quite possibly genius, but at least brilliant. He points out a really good thought here, and that just is exactly that. Sanity and happiness are an impossible combination. And I think with that, you get the sanity, the machine, the agent, the matrix, and then happiness, something different. It's really this different thing is whether or not you've got the easiest life or the hardest life, you can still find happiness. You can be a millionaire or broke and still find happiness. As a machine that does not know anything but facts, I don't know that you can find happiness. Dreamers are something that fuel us all to creativity and drive and desire. Yeah, you could say that people who are greedy or who go after too much aren't happy. And I'm going to say just the opposite. Some of these people who are the most driven people on the planet who fail and react to the poorest because they can't take it, these are actually the people who want it more. And I think they're the people who ultimately do find true steps of happiness in exponential quantities in very fractional time. So I'm not saying someone's always going to be 100% happy all the time, but somebody who gives 100% is going to be 100% more of the time than someone who only ever gives 10%.
Here's a quote that I forgot to mention about when it comes to the Oracle. When Morpheus and Neo go see the Oracle, there's a conversation where Neo asks if she knows everything. And Morpheus says that she knows, she would say that she knows enough. Try not to think of it as right and wrong. She's a guide and helps you find the path. And this is also true with the Oracle during the Greek times of Socrates, because that's where Socrates talks about knowing thyself. And there was a king right around that time that fought the Persians that went to go see the Oracle. And the Oracle said, if you go to war now, a great army will fall. Well, the king didn't know himself, and it was the Greek army that fell, not the Persians.
Right.
So I think it does come down to, even with like nowadays in life too, you really have to know thyself. And once you know thyself, then that allows you to seek more information, seek happiness, if you will. Maybe some sanity there too, because at that point, you know what your limits are, you know who you are, you know what you can and can't do. And really, when you are in pursuit of a goal or anything worthwhile, though, it's really about bettering yourself every day, and that's about knowing thyself. I think that this kind of comes out a little bit with Neo in the Matrix, because he doesn't think that he is the one. And it's not until he starts figuring out and knowing himself and believing in himself and knowing what his limits are that's when he becomes the one. Because once he starts believing, because you even hear Morpheus at the end, Trinity's like, "What's happening?" When he stops all the bullets, and Morpheus says he's believing in himself now, or he believes. So know thyself, right? So, anyways,
it is an interesting point, but it also poses to: is it fate or is it happenstance?
what you talking about, Neo, or just
Yeah,
anything?
in the movie, is Neo's character fate or is it happenstance?
Well, that's a great question because there's there's more that goes with this too.
You can't be the one unless it's fate.
That is true. And so here, I think this ties into probably maybe Christianity a slight bit when we talk about the names. As I mentioned before, there's meaning to all the different names. Like Morpheus, that's the god of dreams, and who wakes Neo up from being basically asleep. Well, in the Matrix, that's Morpheus. He gives him the red pill. An interesting one here that I've been debating about, and I'm not going to talk about it yet. Let me go to
Yeah, come on, just do it. Bite the bullet.
I'm going to go to the architect first.
Okay.
Because you asked it whether or not it's fate or not. And the architect, and I believe this is in the second movie when he meets the architect says that he built the Matrix. And the first time he built it too perfectly, and it caused issues. So he had to recreate the Matrix, and that caused an anomaly to happen. And that anomaly would be Neo. And so he took into account for Neo, and every time Neo's, or the person like Neo, the anomaly would populate, then they will wipe out Zion and start it all over. So you can almost considering the wiping out of Zion and the starting over like the flood of Noah or the flood of Gilgamesh. And then also from there, you're talking about like if the architect is the creator of the Matrix, he would essentially be God, if you will. And I'm not trying to say he is God, but I'm just saying one can make that correlation. And if they make that correlation that he is God, then he created the Matrix knowing that he would have the anomaly, which would then make Neo the one, or Jesus in a sense. And then bringing that up, Neo, if he is the one, this will bring up my one character. I'm trying to figure out what his purpose, like his name and purpose goes with, and that's Cyphers. Now, Cyphers, if you look up in the dictionary, it means zero, or it means like it means a code, right? So is he called Cyphers because Cyphers ends up trying to kill Neo, which would eliminate the one, dropping it back to zero, and that would be Cyphers, because Cyphers had met with the agents saying that he would give up Morpheus in order to go back into the Matrix. And that's where he says the ignorance is bliss comment. So therefore, if he's given up Morpheus because Morpheus has the codes to Zion, is that where his name comes in because of the codes? I don't know. Then you look at the ship, the Nebuchadnezzar. That was a Babylonian king who wiped out the Israelites after they started to like worship false idols and stuff like that. Went against God, so God gave the okay basically in a dream to Nebuchadnezzar to wipe out the Israelites and bring them under as like his subjects. And then that would just it would make sense that Nebuchadnezzar would be the name of the ship that basically brings Neo to head to wipe out Zion to start the new flood or whatever, and create the whole new system of a whole new Matrix. And then we got the Hades wife, Persephone?
Persephone.
She goes against Hades to help out visitors who come down to the underworld. Persephone.
And she also has time away from the underworld.
Exactly.
The original story being 1/3 of her time on top of Earth, 2/3 under.
But in any case, Persephone in the second Matrix goes against Merivelgian and helps Neo to seek the Keymaker. So her name has a purpose there. And the how do you say his name? Merivelgian or something like that. Persephone's husband. He was the one of the people from the very first Matrix. So he's kind of like and if you look in history, the Merivelgians were the first rulers of the Franks or France. So I mean, there's like all these kind of like tie-ins to names and stuff like that.
There are. What do you think of the theory that after 1900s, really, particularly anything of recent, that there are no new stories told?
Ooh.
That all they are is rewritten with a different perception or creativity?
That's a great question because there are many stories are just rewritten with new perspectives and just slight tweaks here and there.
Yeah, Mission Impossible versus James Bond versus the A-Team. It goes on and on and on. Then you get into different pieces, all the way back to Shakespeare and how many of his stories, plays, have been rewritten with just a tweak here or a tweak there. And I think part of the reason that you're going to find that is because, hey man, here's a damn good story and I'm just going to change a few names and a few different circumstances. And it's not the 1600s, the 1700s, or the 1800s anymore. Shakespeare's gone, but what it is 2021. Let's throw a couple new names in there and some new technology.
I think anytime when you have, like, as generations go by, I think when you look at history in general, or memory, I took a great class about this at the University of Colorado, talking about memory and stuff like they talked about, like, probably in, like, the 1700s and before, people would be like, oh, you see that big rock over there? That's where so-and-so's kid died or got ran over by, like, a carriage or something like that. And you fast forward to today's time frames, we have so much knowledge and so much access to information that our knowledge isn't as in depth, but it's more fragments. So we know more things, but just small fragments of more things. Whereas before you could be like, oh yeah, so and so blah 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 that happened over there at that big rock. So I do think it is, you're probably correct that maybe the mass majority of stories, if not all stories, have been rewritten or told slightly bit different for new generations over time. And I think there's a reason for that, though. I think it's because, like, memory has changed. Some of these tales are important because they do share some either philosophical lessons there or moral lessons. And it needs to be done sometimes in a new light for new generations to understand some of this information to be passed down from one to another. For a great example would be with I know you and I both like Shakespeare, but who cannot say, especially with us two, we both love the Leonardo DiCaprio version of Shakespeare. Now that's it's same story basically, totally rewritten, but more modernized for the time frame that when we grew up.
Well, I think one of the beautiful aspects of that movie is that it's not totally rewritten. It is literally just props that are rewritten, a few words that are interchanged, and a sword becomes a gun. They're both still a lethal weapon, do the same job.
Yes. I think where the Matrix kind of differs in that, though, yes, they are encompassing a lot of these stories, but they're actually intertwining and intermixing so many different religious aspects, different philosophies. I didn't really get into, like, knowledge versus reality, where really I wanted to talk a little bit about Plato and, like, his theories about, like, if someone were in a cave, chained up to a wall, never been out to the outside world, and never knew that they were in bondage
Wait
and
a
that they
minute.
were slaves,
I think that's in one of the movies.
right? They're never in bondage. They were never slaves. Would they know that they were not that they were a slave if they didn't know about it? And then when one of them gets freed, goes out, sees the world, comes back, and tries to tell all the others about everything that they're missing out in the world. What would their reaction be? Would they ridicule the person that went out there? Would they disbelieve them? And I think when you look at that aspect of what Plato's talking about and the cave and people who are born into slavery without knowing that they were born in slavery, when someone tries to come by and wake them up to it, it's a reality that they can't see or know. So it's a very few of them would ever wake up to that reality to want to be free. And I think that's very relates really well to what we see in what's happening in the world today. I think you have some people who are trying to give out information to other people, and when they're trying to give out that information, the people who are probably those who would be the equivalent to those in the caves ridicule those who are trying to give them the information or provide additional information so that way they can make an educational decision. And because of that, very few are some have woken up, some are refused to wake up. But I think you see that in the Matrix too. Everyone that they go to, not everyone takes the red pill. So
It's interesting. So I think you're kind of on the same train of thought with where I'm going next, which is you and I know those viewers out there not all of you believe in aliens and have often challenged me. And how do you know aliens exist? You believe, Jesse, fervently that aliens are out there. Well, they are. And we've talked about what it means to be proven or disproven, what I need as far as proof versus what you need as far as proof on a whole different aspect. So, for example, somebody who would be super religious believes in God, but they cannot more so prove in God than I can in aliens. Neither of us can go to a museum and see God or an alien body right now. Someday they'll open it up in Roswell and there'll be a real alien. Come on, Roswell, help us out. But my point being is with the aliens, this was intentional. What if the two brothers, the writers and directors of this movie, were really telling a story, not necessarily an old story retold, something that was truly, or more so than not, much like Interstellar, a new story, but the only way, because you reverse engineer things, to get people's buy-in, to get people interested, to get people to be intrigued was to, with that reverse engineering, after you already have the story, throw in Persephone or Neo or other names which really do or don't tie into the story.
I think that's a whole lot of reverse engineering going on into this story to do that.
Is it though? Or is the story really all about engineering and your energies and perceptions?
I think there's way too much going on in this to say it was reverse engineered.
You can start with a basic storyline.
I think
about everyone being energy. And no one wants to believe that all we are is energy.
Yeah. Well, everything is energy.
So then how do you get people to believe that the body isn't the stimulus?
I'm not sure where you're going with that.
It's the energy. It's energy is not created or destroyed. We're all energy. We have this energy. It's not about one thing or another. It's not about one religion or another. It is literally, we are energy. We are positive or negative. We have some impact. We choose to be positive or negative.
Well, if you're talking about the Matrix, it's obvious that we are energy beings because we put out so much energy anyways, hence the word copper top when when they're in that car and you see and all the machines are using pods of humans as energy sources. Yeah, we do produce energy. We are all energy beings. Anything of matter is energy. one can almost say, and I saw this in a show called I think the Secret or something like that. The guy talks about like, if God is everywhere and in everything, right? Then one can almost say energy is God, because energy is in all of us. It is everywhere at the same time. It is in everything. So one could almost say that. And one could almost even say that even aliens and God can be one and the same. Who's not to say that? And this is where, what's his name? Eric Van Daniken kind of makes sense. Like, what if you have a group of people who are basically cave dwellers who don't know anything about technology, and you have an advanced group of people who come into, or humanoids that come into their planet, and they have ships and they have means to like heal people and all that stuff, while a cave dweller would not know any of these types of technologies, and they would see these advanced people as gods. So who's not to say that God is not an alien? And then, but if you're still going to start thinking about stuff like that too, if God is an alien, then who created those aliens? And so there's still got to be like an ultimate like universal source or universal connectivity there, one source or God source or whatever you want to call it. It would whether or not like that. I think it's called the zero barrier or something like that. Where you go beyond, where you go into the quantum field, and that's where thought becomes like, that's where like that zero barrier is where like thought turns into matter and stuff like that. So I think it can be one and the same. I think aliens do exist. God therefore also probably exists. Maybe not by the definition that we know it, or maybe not by the definition we might recognize it as, but there's probably some kind of universal or God source or something like that, because, or there's not a way for us to fathom it at this point.
Much like yourself, I definitely believe there is a higher spirit, but that whole perception that I have of it being a higher spirit means it does not judge me for the mistakes of not going to church and things like that. So you're saying that, as opposed to these two brothers writing this and coming up with this idea and then reverse engineering it, you're saying that is not something you think is the way that this happened. You're saying this wasn't.
I'm saying it'd be like if they did reverse engineer the Matrix. I'm sure that, I mean, anytime you write a story or anytime you do something, right, you have like a kind of like a beginning, you have like an end thought, and then it's all about filling in the middle. If they did reverse engineer it, which I'm not saying they didn't, it would be very difficult because there's so much stuff being intertwined in here. Like, all I basically talked about was some like, up to this point, and we're already like at 32 minutes just talking about the Matrix.
We knew this was going to be, it's 38 minutes, man.
Oh, 38, okay.
But we knew this was going to be a forever topic.
But the thing is that all we talked about really is just Socrates, and we barely touched on Socrates. We talked about some of the names in that, and how that is developed in there. We talked about just a slight bit of the Oracle and how it relates to the Greeks versus how it related into the Matrix. I didn't really even talk about Plato. I mean, I barely mentioned Plato, and we never even got to like Rene Descartes or even Hilary Putnam, who talks about the brain in the vat theory. There's still Buddhism we have to talk about. There's still Judaism that we have to talk about. That's all still intertwined in this. And there's a whole lot to unpack. And to say that did someone reverse engineer it? Yeah, maybe, but that's a whole lot of like bringing in other aspects and stuff to reverse engineer it. I think maybe like, I don't know, maybe the way my mind works, it might have been easier to have gone to maybe some like philosophy classes, religious classes, or have some studies in some of these other different philosophies and religions, and kind of point out like, hey, it'd be kind of cool if we just took some of these aspects of all of these and built a story around that. So I think it'd be easier for me to like pinpoint like highlights I want to intertwine together, and then build a story around those rather than reverse engineer it.
So you're saying that you would choose to believe that as opposed to coming up with something new and creative. And
This is totally new and creative.
Well, not if they're using pages from everyone else's book.
I think they're taking bits and pieces.
You're either stealing Socrates and Plato and all of these others for your story, or you had your story and then you're inserting them to get belief.
I don't think so, because I hear, yes, they're taking a little bit from Socrates. Yes, they're taking a little bit from Buddhism. Yes, they're taking a little bit from Judaism. Yes, they're taking a little bit from Descartes. Yes, they're taking a little bit from Putnam. And I think like stealing the stories would be as if like they like just rewritten the stories or something like that. Here, I think they're taking bits and pieces of them, creating a new story, intertwining like all the religions together, all the philosophies together to kind of create a new story.
So is that new story a social commentary on reality?
I don't see why not.
I think it's an interesting piece because I could go either way. I choose to think, and this is only a choice, the new movie comes out and I think it's going to explain a lot. We may love it. We may hate it. Please don't be a final episode of The Sopranos. Please don't be. I mean, I didn't mind it, but I also especially didn't mind the end of Game of Thrones, but please, for the masses, don't do that because I'm going to lose more friends that way if I like it and they don't. But it's interesting because, with Socrates in particular, or, you talk about captives in a cave, not knowing that they're captives. Are they the captives? Is this where ignorance is bliss? Or does freedom, getting out of the cave and having your free life, and all of a sudden, much like yourself or myself, we're paying 50% taxes, is that really slavery? Were they actually free in a cave because they weren't paying half of everything to go get, a COVID shot and wear a mask? Thank you. I'm keeping everyone safe.
I think it's a question that one has to ponder for themselves. And I think that's what the Matrix really does, is it makes people question not only reality, what is real, what is not real. Are we even like? There's some philosophers out there, and I think this theme comes through on the Matrix, that maybe we're just a computer simulation.
Just energy.
And who's to say that we are not? Like, if we're talking about just energy, who's to say we're not like what Putnam talks about? Like, we're just brains in a vat that are getting like electrodes put into the brain. If the brain does not know that there's no body and it's just getting these electrical currencies going into it, maybe we are in a matrix so where none of this is real. But how would we know? And even Morpheus talks to Neo about that. Like, he goes, "Have you ever had a dream that felt so real? And then what if you did? What if you were never able to wake up from that dream? How would you be able to tell the difference between a dream versus reality?"
I woke up wet.
You wouldn't be able to. And this is where Descartes kind of comes into play, and he talks about, like, with dreams, like, here you and I talking with each other. This, to us, our senses, everything tells us this is real. But we wouldn't know if this was real or if it was a dream, because if it was a dream, it might all seem real to us, but we wouldn't know it was a dream until after we woke up. And so Descartes talks about, like, how our senses can deceive us, how our dreams, how reality can deceive us by our dreams. And so really, what is reality? What is true? Like, what do we know? What isn't, and what is? And so it's really about knowledge versus reality. Is ignorance truly bliss? Is it not? One might say maybe those who live as slaves, who never knew anything about freedom, maybe that is total bliss. Maybe they are more free than someone who is free, because if all they know is being a slave, they know their place, they know their purpose, they know, like, if they do this, this, and this, they'll get their food and they won't get whipped or whatever. Whereas someone who's free, they have, like, all these other worries to worry about, like, if I don't, where's my next meal coming from? Where is my next whatever coming from?
Yeah.
And it is really, the question from there is like, is being free really free? I mean, to choose your own, have the ability to choose your own path in life. One could say that's really free, but then there's also people who I've had mentors who say people like to be told what to do.
So that is also very interesting because I think that falls right in line with Socrates and the cave. And you see it time and time again throughout history, throughout writings, books, authors, movies, TV shows, everywhere. You see it in the most recent James Bond, No Time to Die, where the villain is letting Bond know people want to be told what to do. And I think there's actually some truth to that, unfortunately, that there are a portion of people who want to be told what to do. A prime example would be, you have to wear a mask. It's only going to be for 2 weeks. And then 2 years later, you're still wearing a mask. But you're being told what to do because you want to put the responsibility in somebody else's hands so that you're not responsible for getting anyone else sick, as opposed to doing what's right and taking care of yourself and taking care of others. You want somebody else to have to own that responsibility. You see it with Loki in the Avengers movies, where Loki is sitting there telling Iron Man and Captain America and a group of people that they all want to be slaves. And, everyone says, oh, no. But then you look throughout history at some of the people we voted into positions of power. It could have been a president, could have been someone in the Senate or the House of Republicans or
House of Republicans or House of Representatives?
House of Representatives. Should be House of Republicans, but House of Representatives or our, judicial branch, people we've put in power. And, it is easily once again said that we do any of that so that they are responsible for us. And we pay for that. 50% of what we make, most Americans are paying, not most Americans, but a large portion of Americans are paying a great deal of money to be told what to do.
Yeah, and here I'm just, for those who blindly put that off onto that responsibility onto others, like you're saying about wearing masks and stuff like that. I think, in my analogy of Plato, and I'm sorry if I'm going to offend people here, but I think they're the ones who are the ones in the cave. And I think the people who are going around trying to show them information that shows charts and information about athletes who normally would, like in the past, have never fallen over and had heart attacks and died on soccer fields and basketball courts and stuff like that. There's obviously something wrong, but then yet they're saying they don't know what's causing these deaths. There's only one. You don't need a whole lot of information here to use some critical thinking. What's different before versus now that could have caused these issues?
There is a new form of steroids out there, ladies and gentlemen.
But in any case, I think a lot of what we see in the Matrix, if we were to break it down, start putting it into today's society, look at some of the names that they've utilized in that movie and see how it relates to their positions in the movie and what they did, those characteristics. I think we can start pulling some of those things and put it into our own reality of the world today.
Absolutely.
And so I think with that, really just the Matrix part, or I think we probably just should sum it up real quick. Maybe possibly do it another part 2 or something later on.
For me, for the Matrix, phenomenal subject. Knowing when you brought this up, this was going to go long. This was going to be a big one. There are so many different avenues to take it. It's not really an easy one to break down because there is so much involved. And it is just with that, there are religious aspects, there are political aspects, there's the whole field of, are we energy? Is it fate or is it choice? Do we have the power to make a difference? Can anyone be an astronaut, for example? No, not everyone will be an astronaut. And with that, it's a great movie that to me really does challenge what is life, what is happiness, what is choice, and which way do we choose to go because of our own realities.
I agree with a lot of what you just said right there. I think a lot of stuff we have to look at here when we talk about the Matrix is what is our reality. It's obvious that what you grew up with, what you your experiences versus my experiences, that creates two different realities. So what is truth? What is reality? What is happiness? I think these are all things the Matrix is trying to convey to us. I think there's also a bit about energy, like you're talking about in there. And I think really just as I kind of close up this topic for myself here, is just take the time to, if you're watching this and you made it all the way through our podcast here talking about the Matrix, just take the time to reflect upon, are you the person who has been freed from the cave, who's seen freedom and tries to go back and tell those who are the slaves who don't know any better, or are you one of those slaves and is there someone who's trying to give you the information and you don't believe them because they're talking about something that's not part of what you know as the norm, or what you kind of grew up into? Because if you grew up in bondage and you didn't know that you were in bondage, you're not going to know what freedom is. But just take a look at about reality in itself, about you. Is there any truth to all of it, to some of it? Are all religion partially truth, or is there only one true religion? I don't know if there is an answer to that. I think there's some truths to all of it. But it's up to you. I think ultimately, your pursuit of happiness, your pursuit of goals, that's what matters, and trying to be better than what you were before. And that's kind of like where I'll just leave it at right now.
Yeah. One of my long-standing questions to myself and that I pose to others is, if you have faith, does that mean you have to believe you have a fate?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, well, here's the thing. If you have faith, right, it's just kind of like, if you want to become a pilot, right? Let's say you have the height measurements and the eyesight, because that plays a part of it. But let's just say you have those the physical qualities that you need to become a pilot. If you have faith that you do everything you're supposed to do, then you're going to become a pilot. So at that point, having the faith of doing all those things to become a pilot, if you already have those physical attributes to meet whatever needs so you can be a pilot, I think in that perspective, it's a self-fulfilling fate, because you had faith in the process, and then that resulted into it. So you created that fate. If you're talking about like in the Matrix with Neo being the one, I'm not really sure that really applies there. It's possible, but even once again though, I think that kind of goes back to those things about the Oracle, nothing in excess, and to know thyself. And if you have faith, then there's probably some kind of fate tied into it, but you definitely have to know yourself to have that occur. I don't know if that really answers your question.
It's a question I don't look for the answer from others. I just pose it to them to help them find their own. Because obviously we all have a fate, but is it predetermined? Does anything we do make a difference? And to me, I can have faith and still have an impact on what my fate will be.
I think there are probably 4 or 5 major decisions you probably make in life, maybe a little bit more, that will determine your fate. Because I think you can go back and look through life. There are major decision points.
In or out? Do I tuck my shirt in or wear it out?
That there are major decision points that can alter one's fate. And really, like that could I mean, a person could have simply chosen to go left one day instead of right, and then that could have caused them a car accident versus not going to get in a car accident, which could have made them crippled or not crippled. Right? Is it predetermined? I don't think it's predetermined. I just think that there's an optional road there, and then there's certain decision points that cause that determination of fate. And I think some of them, it might be more than 5, but I would say at least 5 are there in anyone's lifetime. Any case, what's your next week's?
All right, my next week's Smarter Challenge. I actually put a fair amount of thought into this and had a lot of fun with it. And it was somewhat driven by your topic with the Matrix. And so mine is aliens versus predators. Who wins and why? In the ultimate battle of those two races, who would be the victor and why?
Okay. Anything you want to say to the people?
Thank you guys for watching the show. Please do not drink and drive. Remember, life is great. And I hope you leave some feedback. Let us know what you thought about this subject. We know we could have talked for 24 hours straight. Maybe one of these times we'll have like the Matrix reboot, so to speak. And it'll be like a 24-hour show. It'll be like cases of Mountain Dew, like we were gamers playing for 24 hours straight. Some rock stars, coffee, and
Make
of course,
like a marathon.
Yeah, like a marathon, like 6 bottles of
like a
scotch.
charity marathon.
Like we're like Scotch, Mountain Dew, Scotch, Rockstar, Scotch. We're not going to stop this podcast until you guys give us 500 likes, and then we just die because no one liked it. Oh, shoot.
So, I will just say, hey, thank you for being a fan, watching us. As normal, if you're watching us for the first time, we are on YouTube, we're on Rumble, Podbean, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Amazon Music and Audible Podcasts. We will be back the same Scotch time, same Scotch hour. So cheers.
Cheers.
We hope you enjoyed this evening's episode of Scotch Hour. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, if you have not done so already, please become a Patron member, with memberships starting as low as $1 a month. Thank you, and hopefully you have a wonderful evening.